Our last speaker for the day is going to be Fabrice Grinda. Fabrice is a tremendous entrepreneur. He's been the founder of OLX. He's made probably one of the most number of investments as an individual angel of people that I know. He's invested all over the world, Brazil, Turkey, a couple of other continents. Well, and he's going to tell us a little bit about 150 plus investments later. Fabrice Grinda on trends and picking winners, Airbnb, Alibaba, Dropbox, and more. Please give it up for Fabrice. Sorry, and I'm up here with him.
I thought we were chatting.
Can someone bring me another Mai Tai? So, Fabrice, 150 investments?
182.
182 investments. You did those all last week?
Actually, 20 so far this year.
20 this year, okay. And when did you start? When did you start investing? I guess you've been an entrepreneur for quite some time.
Yeah, so my day job is to be an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur for the last 17 years, and the reality is, by virtue of being an entrepreneur, people come to you for advice, and they say, "Hey, why don't you invest?" And so I've been an angel investor as long as I've been an entrepreneur. So I started investing in '98 when I built my first company. So 17 years.
Okay. Is there a difference in what you've been investing in than, say, the last 5 years than in the first 5 years? I know you had some different experiences, maybe.
You know, not really. Ever since the beginning, because my day job is to be an internet entrepreneur, I really don't have time to spend angel investing, and I'm getting 100 deals a week. And so I'm like, I had to define, and in this way, we're very similar.
You don't have any time, but you've done 20 this year.
Well, I came up with an approach not to do for it to not take too much time, and so I came up with a bunch of heuristics. Like, it's kind of like you. It's like, I only invest in categories that I understand and that I know because I don't have time to go and learn B2B or biotech or green tech. So I'm going to do, I've loved consumer-facing marketplaces. And so from the very beginning to today, I still invest in consumer-facing marketplaces. And then in terms of approach, it's literally, are you live? Do I like you? So do I like the product? Do I like the team? Do I like the deal terms? And do I like the business? And so literally these 4 criteria, in 1 hour, I'll say I'm in or I'm not in. And do I like the business, though, is subdivided, if you want, in 9 other heuristics, which is like market size, unit economics, et cetera, et cetera. And based on that, in 1 hour, I can decide.
And do you have any specific criteria where you wouldn't invest? Is like there are valuation limits, or they don't have product out the door yet, or there's limited kind of customer where you're like, okay, I don't want to invest until this stage, or that's too high price? Yeah,
I mean, look, I try to be valuation sensitive, but the thing is, because the world has changed, so there are things that have changed in the last 17 years. In fact, my strategy has fundamentally changed over the last 5 years. If you go back to like 2006, 2007, 2008, I was investing, let's say, the companies were raising $1 million at 4 pre in priced rounds. I was writing a 50K check. And my best investment is, and on a multiple perspective, is actually one of those companies, a company called Bryroll. I put in 100K actually at 4 pre. And the company was bought by Yahoo last year for $640 million. Now, net of dilution was a 55x return. Now, what happened is in 08, 09, it started becoming convertible notes. So a company that's live, a little bit of traction, let's say 25K a month in revenues, it was like 6 to 8 million cap notes. Then you had a period of time in like 2011, 2012, 2013, and 2013 was probably the worst. It was like uncapped notes became the rage. And so on companies that often had product but no revenue, no traction, I actually decreased my volume of investment a lot. And now, out of Y Combinator and companies like that, you're seeing capped at 8 to 12 with companies with very limited traction. So what I've done is I'm like, you know what? These are great entrepreneurs, and YC and chooses great companies, but I'm not willing to make a bet right now. I'll just wait. I wait 12 months. The company's doing 100K, 150K, right, 200K a month in sales, and I'm investing at a tiny premium to that. So I'll pay 15 pre now, or 20 pre, but the company's doing $500,000 a month. And so I've increased the check size, and I've delayed the stage just in light of where the market's at.
So when YC does a demo day, you look at the batch that's a year old to start writing checks for them.
Exactly. But I do go to demo day, and I do identify them today. I get the conversation going, and I'll invest a year later.
Okay, that's a patient approach. I guess one thing that I found was interesting about your background when I first started hearing about you was that you invest all over the world, or at least in a lot of places other people don't. I'm not sure if everybody knows OLX, but OLX was an online classifieds platform that was delivering services and products to many different countries around the world. Would you say that's why that opened up your approach to other markets?
Well, taking a step back, I mean, I'm French. And so the first big company I built was an eBay for Southern Europe called Auckland. Raised a whole bunch of venture money. I sold it. And out of that, I helped build an eBay for Latin America called Deremate, which sadly lost the war in Mercado Libre, but we sold it to Mercado Libre, which is now the leading auction site in Latin America. And so I was already exposed to the international markets. And so when I built OLX, which was a Craigslist 2.0 for the rest of the world, I didn't actually launch it saying we're going to be big in the rest of the world. I just launched it. And then we're like, okay, it's a user-generated content product, and so it's a question of building a scale and having critical mass of buyers and sellers in any given market. I didn't know we were going to be big. We launched in 100 countries in 50 languages. It just so happened to take off in 2 markets really fast. It took up in in Portugal and Pakistan, and became very big there really fast. It kind of took off in India and Brazil. So from a market size perspective, we decided to focus there. Now today, of course, 9 years later, the company has 1,200 employees, 40 countries. We're the leading classified site in Brazil, in Poland, in Romania, in Ukraine, in India, and Pakistan, pretty much all Southeast Asia, all of Latin America, ex Chile, all of Africa, ex South Africa, and all of Eastern Europe, ex Russia. The company does 200 million unique visitors a month. To give you a sense of scale, it's like Snapchat type size, except no one's heard of it in the US. But it's worth a couple billion right now. It's doing really, really well. And of course, that exposure, like all of a sudden, I was going to India and Pakistan and Nigeria, and I started getting exposure to the entrepreneurs and the internet ecosystems there. We were one of the leading employers. We were one of the leading companies, and so I started investing there. But paradoxically, whereas 5 years ago, maybe 50% of my investments were outside the US, 50% were in the US, I've actually recentered a bit more of my investments in the US the last 3 years for macroeconomic and political reasons.
Okay. Are there any particular geographies outside the US which you are still bullish on, or are you all back in the US as a result?
Well, I'm not all back in the US. So last year I did 41 investments, 70% in the US, 15% in Germany, and then opportunistically in Brazil, in Turkey, in Russia, in France, and in the UK. The thing is, if you take a step back, I mean, 5 years ago, for instance, it looked like Brazil was headed to be an amazing, robust ecosystem and like one of the drivers of growth in the economy. They had found these massive oil reserves and gas reserves. They were benefiting from the super cycle in commodities, exporting soybean and commodities to China. The inflation has finally fallen. The Bolsa Familia had made the country a lot wealthier. It was a wonderful time to invest in Brazil, but they actually, if you want, squandered the opportunity. They kept interest rates too low too long. They didn't tackle what was called the Custo Brasil, and so it's become harder. And look at Russia. We had several companies in Russia that were doing like 100 million plus in revenues, completely crushing it. And just because Putin decided that he wanted to, reestablish the nation-state political order of like the 20th century, now it's really hard to get money. We have companies in Russia that are crushing it, and we can't raise money from American investors because they want to be there. And so because of that, and then the U.S. has done fantastically well, right? Macroeconomically speaking, we're at full employment. We have fastest growing GDP country in the OECD world. I mean, it's a wonderful time to be in the US. And the US ecosystem, I mean, you were alluding to it before, but it's more robust than ever before. It's really hard to get Series A and Series B money in other markets. So you have if you go anywhere in the world, frankly, I mean, and not just even the smaller markets, you have entrepreneurs. You have seed capital, and if your company reaches 100 plus million in valuation and revenues, Tiger Global will find you, and Facebook will buy you, Google will buy you. The problem is, if you're a 10 million revenue company, even if you're profitable, you're too small, and if you need to raise 5-10 million, that Series A money, Series B money is not really available, and And the exits are not really available. You're too small to go public, and you're too small to be interesting to the American acquirers. So we focused in the larger markets because at least you get the probability of the company reaching that 100 million valuation. And that's why we focused not in Chile. Despite startups, Chile is wonderful, but I'd rather focus on Brazil because you can get a $100 million company there. Same thing with Russia. Same thing with Turkey. Same thing with Germany.
You listed here as 3 of the winners that, I don't know, are you an investor in Airbnb, Alibaba, and Dropbox, or were you?
Yes, at different stages. So I invested in Alibaba Group when they were about $6 a share, so about 3 years ago. So if you think of
great bet.
Which is a fantastic bet, and actually it was on an absolute dollar basis because I actually put a lot of money, was my best performing investment. So if you look at today, I have 2 distinctive investing strategies. I have that seed strategy, where I'm investing 150K, 200K checks in companies that have a little bit of traction, valuations or whatever, 5 to 15 or 20, that have some revenues and unit economics. But because companies are staying private longer than ever before, you can actually now identify the unicorns and the super unicorns. It used to be, Apple went public at a 1.7 billion valuation. Microsoft at a 500 million valuation. Amazon at 440 million valuation. And the average time between a venture investment and IPO was 3.1 years 15 years ago. Now it's 7.3 years. So now everyone in the world knows Uber is a fantastic company. Everyone in the world knows Airbnb is a fantastic company. And because the companies are staying private longer, it's giving people like me the opportunity to invest more at the later stage. So now I have that second category where I invest later stage in more explicit winners. So I invested in later stages in Uber, in Airbnb, in Dropbox, in London Club, in Alibaba Group, in many, many others.
And how are you doing those investments? Are you a direct investor in those vehicles? You're getting in through funds? You're getting in through secondary markets?
So at the later stages, there are a number of ways to get in. The thing is, I'm known as the marketplace investor. And so often I'm invited, and I never compete with VCs, right? If the micro seed funds are writing 500K checks and I'm writing at seed stage 150K check, I'm not competing with them. I'm not taking a board seat. At the Series A, I'll write a 250K check. They're writing a 4 million check. At the late stage, they're writing $100 million checks. I'm writing $1 million check. So they'll invite me in if I have value added. So that's part of it. So times primary. But I do a lot of secondary. I'll go on LinkedIn. I'll see what are the employees that were there for more than 4 years that are early enough that they have shares that may want liquidity. I emailed, I think recently I did it for a company I was interested in. I emailed 100 of them. Like 10 replied, and I bought shares. I made sure to buy less than 50% of their allocation. We agreed on a price. That was that.
I'm seeing Atish from EquityZen in the back of the room shake his head because I think you're the only person he might not be able to get as a customer for secondary sales because you do it directly. But I don't think this is the average case buyer necessarily. Yeah, actually, Atish is one of our founders. EquityZen is a secondary marketplace for private capital. So I think I would agree with you in that writing a small check relative to the round size with some value added is a way to get into deals.
Absolutely.
In a lot of places. So you've been an entrepreneur. You've been an investor both directly and it sounds like indirectly. Are there any funds that you think are good investments, or you generally prefer to do all this work yourself?
Clearly the strategy that you're using is one that makes a lot of sense. Now, I've not been an LP in funds just because I have so much personal exposure, right? I have 182 investments right now. It'll probably be 200 within a couple of months. And if I look at my portfolio, to date I've had 56 exits. I made money on 26. I lost money on 30. And overall, I've had a 6x return and a 130% IRR. So I'm doing pretty well.
Okay, I'm investing in you.
And so it doesn't make sense for me to be an LP in funds. That said, obviously, I think what you said earlier makes a lot of sense. Like if you don't have the diversification, you're not gonna hit enough winners. Yeah. There's a power law curve to venture exits. So if you look at the value created by startups at exit, the very short tail accounts for most of the value, so you need to be in there. And so having a diversified portfolio, LI 500, makes a lot of sense. So if you could be an LP in Sequoia, by all means, you should be. But alternatively, I think the 500 play makes a lot of sense. So being an LP in
I'll give you that 500 give you that $20 later, Fabrice. That's great. So you've been active on AngelList in a couple different ways. You're running a syndicate or somewhat?
Yeah, I'm one of the syndicate leads. I wasn't quite sure what to make of it at first, and I wasn't maybe as aggressive as I should have been, but I realized it's actually wonderful. It's wonderful for the companies because they can raise money faster and easier than ever before without needing to talk to many people. Also, having one signature, which is mine, as opposed to having to chase or hunt down 100 or 50 signatures is a lot easier. But those people that invest in you on AngelList, they're typically not the CEOs of the different companies, but they're like the second tier. But they're wonderful people. They're going to be your top promoters. They're going to be your customers. They're going to do PR. You have a press release, you push it to your AngelList investors. They'll tweet it. They'll Facebook it. It's a great way to get your word out. So I'm a huge proponent of crowdfunding, and it makes all the more sense now. That's what maybe slightly self-serving to go through people that filter the selection like me.
Right. So you're getting access to great deals. You're collecting a lot of supporters, but you don't have to go chase them down for signatures because you're doing it through one vehicle.
Exactly.
What's kind of an average scenario for you when you're making a syndicate investment in a syndicate structure? How much do you put in? How much do you raise from your backers? How many backers?
Yeah. So on AngelList and Funders Club, on average, the companies, if I'm leading the round, the companies are going to be raising, let's say, $750K to $1 million, so a typical seed round. I actually invest, so I don't have money directly I invest directly in the company personally. So I'm going to be investing with my partner, Jose Marin, $150K to $200K in the company, independent of whatever we put in the syndicate, and then the syndicate will raise $500K, $750K. I've also built multi-company funds on AngelList. So if people just want to invest in everything I invest in, typically I've raised like $1 million a pop, and I'm putting $50K each from each of these multi-company funds. So then that covers my next 20 investments, and I do about 2 of these a year. 20
company micro portfolios that people are putting out $1 million.
I mean, it's an easy way for my friends to back me, basically.
Right.
I mean, I don't expect to make real money from that.
On a deal-by-deal basis.
Yeah, exactly.
And what, just to get a little bit more of those mechanics, do you charge carry and a fee? What's the structure there?
On the AngelList and Funders Club, so we don't charge fees. AngelList doesn't have fees. They take 5% carry. Historically, I've just put in a 15% carry on average. So it's 20% carry. It's 0-20. But the reality is I don't really expect to make money that way because the amount of money raised, let's say I do 10 deals at $500K a pop. That's $5 million a year. If they do on average 3x, 4x, it's 15 million of which I make 15%, split 2 ways with Jose. I mean, that's a couple million. I mean, it's nice money, but it doesn't change anything.
Got it. What segments do you think are interesting these days? I don't know if you have a favorite sort of area of interest. It sounds like you're still kind of meat and potatoes is marketplaces, maybe some SaaS and consumer.
It's really marketplaces because we're in a very unique time in history. Companies that used to be built and needed to be vertically integrated are completely being reinvented by marketplaces. And even categories that felt that maybe they were immune to online disruption are completely being reinvented by marketplaces. Let me give you a few examples. So obviously during the bubble days, I mean, and you talked about the need of having Oracle service, et cetera, but if you wanted to build a grocery business, you were Webvan, right? You needed billions of dollars because you needed the warehouse with the cold storage, you needed the inventory, you needed like the trucks with the refrigeration to do the delivery. I mean, it's billions and billions of dollars, and ultimately the capital intensity took you out of business. Today, you're building an asset-light Webvan with an Instacart, where Instacart is actually a marketplace. The contractors work for them. When there's an order, they send it's kind of like Uber, they send a request saying, hey, could someone go pick up the groceries at this restaurant, at this grocery store? And so they're building the equivalent from a user experience of Webvan for like millions of dollars. Even categories, I mean, obviously Uber and Airbnb have reinvented taxis and the hotel business, if you want. But at the same time, every other categories, I mean, Sweeten is reinventing like home renovation. You press a button, someone helps you renovate your home. Or Glam Squad, and I'm not investors in either of these. Glam Squad is like Uber for beauty products. And it's all of a sudden there's someone comes and does your hair at home or your makeup. And you wouldn't think that these would be, and these are businesses that are like supposedly immune to online disruption. And the reason these can be done is because you actually don't have these companies don't have employees, right? It's a marketplace model where you have these contractors, and it's really the trend of the world. More and more people, I mean, millennials don't want a 9-to-5 job. They want to work when they want to work, for as long as they want to work, to meet whatever objective they may have, whether it's to make money or have a better quality of life. And so working for the on-demand economy makes a lot of sense.
That's interesting. Any thoughts about the exit side of the equation, and how do you have any control or involvement in how companies exit? Do you think you're going to get market exits out of IPOs, or is it mostly M&A and maybe some partial secondary?
Yeah, so part of the reason I'm actually also refocused on the US, even though it's still 30% outside the US, is exits are hard to get outside of the US, outside of the 100+ million valuation. So if your company reaches over 100 million, you get exits everywhere. In the US, it's super robust. I mean, I have companies that are failing that are exiting successfully because in acqui-hire models, you now can have exits at multiple levels. Like you can exit in up rounds. So if you're a seed investor, sometimes you can even exit in the A or the B or the C. And so more and more, I'm seeing more exits than ever before. Last year I had 17 exits. 10 failures and 7 successes. But the volume as a percentage of the portfolio is actually increasing because now there are more options for exit. Now, most of the exits are no longer at IPO because companies, as we mentioned before, are staying private longer because it's really painful to go public. I mean, to go public. So it used to be companies were going public, as I said, $500 million valuation. Now they're waiting for $1 billion, $100 billion or $200 billion. I mean, Airbnb, Alibaba Group or Facebook. And so we're selling in the up rounds, and we're keeping part of the shares typically until the IPO.
So it's kind of a dollar cost averaging on the way up, where you're selling a portion at each up round.
Exactly.
Got it. And do you have any controller say over that, or you're just kind of waiting? It's really
no. I mean, look, the reality is I own 2%, 3%, 1% of any of these businesses. I don't join boards. I mean, we're extremely helpful in the sense that we'll give you intros to VCs, and we'll help you raise your Series A and B. We're going to help you write your decks. We're going to make intros to other portfolio companies who do BD deals. But this is high value, low time and commitment for us. And so we can't really help you, and we don't control the exit. The exit is controlled either when people want to buy the company, or when it's time for the company to sell.
Right.
So we're not involved.
Yeah. So I agree with you in that I find having a high volume strategy also lessens your need to sort of have any board control structure or worry about direct involvement.
And by the way, it's exactly like you said. The companies that need the help are the companies that are not doing well. And what I don't like about being on a board is you end up spending all your time with the companies that are failing as opposed to the companies that are creating value. So the hands-off approach, where you're actually doing high-value introductions to investors or potential acquirers or to BD partners, is much, much more meaningful and valuable for the companies.
Do you? It sounds like you've pulled back a little bit on the outside the U.S. strategy, but let's look over the horizon, maybe 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
Are you bullish on the international market, and kind of are you bullish on unicorns or $100 million exits or smaller exits?
Well, just because of the nature of the market, where you have that dearth of Series A, Series B in the rest of the world, sadly you have to focus more on the companies that get about the 100 million plus in valuation. So the centaurs more than the unicorns. Right. There are not many unicorns in the rest of the world. I still focus mostly on the larger companies. I mean, we're focusing more in India right now than we have before. Opportunistically, I'll do China, but I don't have great deal flow from China, so I'll do the explicit winners. In China, everyone knows that we should invest in Xiaomi. That's not. It's not rocket science. The same way it was reasonably obvious you had to invest in Tencent or Alibaba before.
You brought up rocket science. Any thoughts about Rocket's strategy? I won't get into their ethics and business practices necessarily, but what do you think of, when I think of it like international investing, the people that come on my radar are sort of Tiger, Naspers, and Rocket. Those are the folks that I see taking risks going into like places where other people don't go.
So look, if I'm investing in a company outside of the US, I'm taking market risk. I do not want to take idea risk. And so it makes actually sense to invest in companies that are copying the best American models when you're doing the rest of the world, if it's an idea that has a reason to be local. So there are global ideas. I mean, Airbnb is global, Pinterest is global, WhatsApp is global. I wouldn't invest in copies of that. But local, if you're building a local Amazon, you need local supply chain, local payments, local delivery. There it makes sense. And so there, in terms of thinking of ideas, it makes sense. If you're investing outside of the US, investing in the transcribed version of an American idea makes a lot of sense, because then you're not taking the idea risk. That said, the way you do it and the business practices, et cetera, do matter. And so don't love the way the Rocket guys approach things.
So we have 1 minute, and I'll ask you one more question, and if we have time from the audience. You put together a post and you've done a talk on the case for optimism. For folks in the audience, it's not necessarily an investor perspective. It's more just a general human perspective and kind of the positive case for technology and finance impacting the lives of everyone. I'll ask you Peter Thiel's question was, what do you believe that most people don't believe, and how does that impact your view on the world?
Most people believe that we're facing, I mean, maybe it's less true today because oil prices are lower, but like energy shortages, for instance. And I actually think we're on the cusp of an energy revolution, and that goes way beyond like the shale oil and fracking revolution. I mean, solar productivity is improving about 14% a year every year. So we're already reaching grid parity in many places around the world. Storage of electricity is actually improving reasonably dramatically. So we could be at grid parity in most places in the world within 15, 20 years. And when that happens, wonderful things start happening, because then you can get tens of billions of investments without subsidies. You actually have the marginal cost of electricity that goes to essentially zero. And imagine the 1970s, computer power was extraordinarily expensive. It was rationed. You only could have access for 30 minutes. So people would only use it to run very expensive simulations. The day that the marginal cost of energy is zero, people will be able to waste energy. And so the amount of things we'll be able to do is pretty amazing. I mean, people are worrying about like water shortages. Well, with unlimited electricity, you actually can desalinate salt water. And so you have fresh water, because we have infinite fresh water. Then you have infinite food, because you can grow crops in the desert, because you have water to grow crops in the desert. And so a lot of the shortages and the Malthusian constraints that people are fearing from overpopulation or not enough food, et cetera, are actually very artificial. And the minute you remove that constraint, and it'll happen the next 30 years or so, actually, it's going to absolutely transform the world for the better.
It's an awesome perspective. If we have any questions from the audience, we can take them. If not, we'll move on to the Mai Tai reception. Awesome. I think we got a bunch of alcoholics in the audience. Fabrice, thank you so much for spending time with us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave.
I want to say a really big thank you to the Knight Foundation and the Simpkins family for making today possible, and for all of you for coming out to check us out. For those of you who do follow 500 around the world, we have a few events coming up. Our Batch 12 Demo Day in Mountain View will happen on May 12th. 2015. Those of you who are LPs in the fund can check out the sneak preview a few days before that. We're doing PreMoney in San Francisco in June 12th, so a lot of the same topics here, but some additional speakers from the Valley. And then we're doing our Geeks on a Plane trip to the Middle East sometime later this year in Q3. If you folks would like to learn more about that, please come grab a Mai Tai with me afterward. Thanks again to Fabrice. Thank you all for coming, and let's go have a drink. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it was fun.